Today, I want to share something that integrates both neurobiology and faith, something that speaks not just to your mind, but to the deepest part of your spirit. From a scientific standpoint, the brain is built to anticipate change. It scans for shifts, patterns, and signals. But often we get stuck in mental loops, caught in states of inertia. Spiritually, that mirrors what happens when we resist divine movement. But here's the truth. When a shift is about to happen, whether in our brain, our lives, or in the atmosphere around us, it's preceded by tension, pressure, and discomfort. That's not a sign to quit. It's a signal to prepare. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, is greatest when we're most uncomfortable. Likewise, divine transformation comes when we're willing to move even before we see the full picture. God is about to shift everything. And this is not just metaphorical. The circumstances, the relationships, the opportunities, they're being restructured. Your job is not to control the shift. Your job is to get ready to move. When the time comes, delay is disobedience. The alignment of your preparation and God's timing determines the magnitude of outcome. Discomfort is often the brain and spirit's early warning system for divine transition. When we begin to feel uneasy, unsettled, or even slightly out of rhythm with our usual patterns, it's not always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it's an indication that something is about to shift. From a neurological perspective, discomfort arises when the brain detects inconsistency between what it expects and what is actually happening. This is called prediction error. The brain thrives on predictability. It builds models based on past experiences and prefers to run on automatic patterns. However, when a shift is approaching, those models no longer apply cleanly, and the mind starts to register dissonance. This dissonance feels like restlessness, frustration, or emotional agitation, but it's often the brain's signal that it's time to pay attention. Spiritually, this discomfort aligns with what many biblical figures experienced before their greatest moments of movement. Consider Abraham before he was called to leave his land, or Moses before he encountered God at the burning bush. These were not moments of peace and predictability. They were filled with discomfort, confusion, and internal questioning. That discomfort, rather than being a curse, was the prelude to transformation. It was God's way of shaking the soul awake, of disrupting comfort zones to prepare for movement. We often pray for clarity and change, but when the signs of change arrive through discomfort, we mistake them for attacks or setbacks. Yet it's that very friction that makes us alert, aware, and sensitive to God's voice. Discomfort breaks rhythm. It disrupts autopilot. It pulls us out of passivity and forces us to confront the moment we're in. The same way a body grows under resistance, the spirit grows under pressure, and the brain, when faced with change, activates its learning centers. Neural networks that once rested begin firing. Energy increases, focus heightens. The amygdala, the brain's emotional processing center, flags these moments as significant. If we remain spiritually and mentally dull, we miss these critical flags. But if we lean in, we begin to recognize that the uneasiness is actually an invitation to awareness. It's God's way of whispering, "Get ready. I'm about to move." There's a profound connection between spiritual prompting and neurobiological readiness. The brain's reticular activating system, RAS, which filters what we pay attention to, starts shifting its focus in response to persistent discomfort. That's why when people feel like something is off, they begin noticing signs, patterns, confirmations. It's not mystical randomness. It's the brain aligning with a deeper sense of intuition and divine alertness. And in this state of increased awareness, both spiritually and neurologically, we become more receptive to redirection. But receptivity requires humility. Many people ignore discomfort, suppress it, or medicate it. They run from the very feeling that is meant to awaken them. God does not usually scream in comfort. He whispers in tension. That subtle agitation is designed to make you ask questions, to seek clarity, to step out of cycles. And often, just as the brain strengthens its pathways through repetition, the spirit strengthens its discernment through obedience. When we start to obey what the discomfort is pointing toward, we enter into alignment. Our thinking shifts, our patterns adjust, our perception opens. This is not about overanalyzing every moment of tension, but learning to distinguish between chaos that confuses and discomfort that prepares. The former drains you, the latter draws you closer to divine instruction. Much like how the brain prunes unused neural connections during periods of growth, God begins to remove distractions and relationships during periods of spiritual preparation. That pruning can feel like loss, like rejection, like doors closing, but it's all part of the early warning system. The shaking isn't punishment, it's calibration. Something new is trying to emerge, but it needs space, and discomfort clears the space. It is both the signal and the catalyst. It wakes you up emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. It forces you to confront what's no longer working, what's no longer aligned, and what must be left behind. When you find yourself in a season of persistent discomfort, you must ask deeper questions. Not what's wrong with me, but what's trying to shift in me. This mindset moves you from victimhood to awareness, from confusion to curiosity, and curiosity opens the door to revelation. The brain begins to integrate new truths more rapidly when paired with emotional intensity. Spiritually, that's the moment revelation becomes transformation. And transformation always starts with tension. The mistake most people make is to try to escape the discomfort prematurely, to rush to resolve what was meant to be revealed gradually. But if you sit with the discomfort, if you lean in and listen, you'll start to sense direction emerging from disruption. Spiritual readiness requires mental flexibility. Neuroplasticity mirrors faith in motion. The human brain is designed not to stay fixed, but to adapt, rewire, and reshape itself in response to experience. This process, known as neuroplasticity, is most active when we are learning something new, stepping into unfamiliar territory, or being challenged beyond our current capacities. In the same way, spiritual growth demands that we be willing to release familiar mindsets, habits, and comfort zones to embrace the movement of God. When God is preparing to shift something in our lives, the internal resistance we feel is not just emotional, it is neurological. The brain prefers what it already knows, but faith does not operate in the realm of the known. Faith is activated in the uncertainty, in the stretch, in the moment where the next step is not fully visible. Mental flexibility allows the mind to adapt to new spiritual revelations without defaulting to fear or skepticism. It's not enough to believe in theory, we must be willing to rewire in practice. That means our internal narratives, the way we interpret situations, and our willingness to respond quickly must all evolve. The brain changes based on what we repeatedly think, say, and do. In moments where God begins to move, if we are still clinging to outdated frameworks, we will misinterpret divine opportunities as threats. Mental rigidity leads to spiritual stagnation. But when we allow ourselves to think differently, to stay open, to remain sensitive to the Holy Spirit, we mirror the flexibility the brain already possesses at a biological level. Faith in motion is not passive. It is not static belief. It is dynamic trust that results in movement, in decisions, in obedience that rewrites the story. Neuroplasticity is activated when effort meets intention. Similarly, spiritual flexibility is activated when willingness meets surrender. The most effective changes in the brain happen when a person is engaged, alert, and emotionally invested. In the spiritual realm, transformation occurs when the heart is willing, the mind is submitted, and the soul is attentive. That means we must posture ourselves to move when God speaks, not after He confirms everything. The very act of moving forward, even with uncertainty, creates a mental and spiritual feedback loop that builds resilience. Discernment and strength. The mind and spirit are deeply interconnected. What we feed one influences the other, If the mind is saturated with fear, doubt, and rigid thinking, the spirit becomes dull, hesitant, and resistant. But when the mind begins to stretch, when it allows for new thoughts, God-sized possibilities, and divine redirection, the spirit follows. The renewing of the mind is not a suggestion. It is the process by which we align ourselves with God's ongoing work. Romans 12:2 speaks directly to this. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. This transformation is not a one-time event. It is continual, and it requires flexibility. Renewal means the old ways of interpreting life, relationships, and purpose must yield to the truth that God reveals in each season. People often pray for God to do a new thing, but they continue thinking in old ways. They ask for change, but resist the mental and spiritual stretching required to walk into it. The same way muscles grow through resistance, the mind grows through challenge, and the spirit grows through obedience. Faith isn't just a feeling, it's a force that pushes you beyond logic into alignment, and that alignment requires a brain and a spirit that are both prepared to let go of what was and embrace what could be. Faith in motion is not about having all the answers. It's about responding to God with readiness, knowing that obedience will open the understanding. When God signals a shift, those who are mentally rigid will look for reasons to stay. They will analyze the unknown until it becomes paralyzing. But those with mental flexibility will recognize the stretching as preparation. They will sense that the disruption is not chaos, it is calibration. The process of letting go mentally mirrors the spiritual act of surrender. It's not about abandoning reason, but about submitting reason to revelation. That submission creates space in the mind and spirit for God to deposit new instruction. And when the instruction comes, movement must follow. Mental flexibility also increases resilience. When we are willing to change our thought patterns, we become less dependent on external circumstances for our peace. We learn to anchor in truth, not trends. We begin to think with the mind of Christ, not just out of habit. This rewiring empowers us to hear God clearly and to respond swiftly. In times of transition, spiritual readiness is not about being perfect. It is about being pliable. The clay that can be molded is the clay that can be used. The mind that is willing to stretch is the mind that can carry new revelation. The spirit that is willing to move is the spirit that can carry fresh anointing, and that willingness must be cultivated daily through surrender, prayer, reflection, and action that aligns with the voice of God. Delay in movement creates cognitive and spiritual dissonance. Hesitation has consequences. When a person senses a clear prompting, whether through divine leading, internal conviction, or repeated confirmation, and yet holds back, a tension begins to form within both the mind and the spirit. This tension is not always immediately visible to others, but internally it manifests as restlessness, anxiety, and a sense of disconnection. From a neurological standpoint, when the brain identifies a course of action based on data, emotion, and higher intention, it expects the body to follow. If there is a delay, the nervous system begins to perceive that delay as conflict. This conflict becomes a form of internal stress, leading to a breakdown in clarity and decision-making. Spiritually, the same principle applies. When God speaks or prompts, it is not a suggestion. It is a call to alignment. Delayed obedience is disobedience in slow motion. It often masquerades as caution or wisdom, but in many cases it is fear wrapped in analysis. The longer one hesitates after receiving a divine nudge, the harder it becomes to move. Spiritual inertia sets in, and the heart becomes dull to what was once vivid. The voice that was clear begins to fade, not because God stops speaking, but because hesitation creates internal noise that drowns him out. The more we ignore divine instruction, the more disoriented we become. It's not simply that we miss opportunities. We begin to lose our internal rhythm with God's timing. The brain craves congruence between thought and action. When you believe something but fail to act on it, cognitive dissonance develops. This is the psychological discomfort experienced when actions do not align with beliefs or intentions. For a believer, this dissonance becomes even more layered. It becomes spiritual dissonance, the awareness that you are out of sync with what God has revealed or asked of you. This tension drains energy, peace, and momentum. Instead of walking with assurance, the mind second guesses. Instead of stepping out in faith, the soul becomes consumed with hypothetical fears. Over time, that dissonance can harden into spiritual apathy, where the heart stops expecting, the mind stops pursuing, and the body stops moving. The consequences of delay are not always immediate, but they are cumulative. Opportunities that were aligned with a specific time can pass. Relationships that were meant to catalyze growth can drift. Doors that were opened for a moment can close. Divine timing is precise, not because God is rigid, but because he operates with perfect foresight. What he prepares in one season may not be available in the next. When we delay, we step out of the flow of preparation and into a cycle of regret. We look back and wonder what might have been different if we had moved when prompted. That regret can become paralyzing if not surrendered. The goal is not to live in fear of missing God's will, but to understand the weight of divine timing and the role we play in it. Hesitation also weakens spiritual confidence. The more you delay, the more uncertain you become about your ability to discern God's voice. You start doubting whether it was really him, whether it really mattered, whether it's too late. But that doubt is often the fruit of delay, not its cause. It grows in the gap between revelation and response. Every time you respond promptly to a prompting, your spiritual sensitivity increases. Every time you hesitate, your clarity diminishes. Momentum in the spiritual life is built through movement, not perfection. God does not demand flawless execution, but he does respond to faith in action. Movement signals trust, and trust deepens intimacy. In brain, delayed action after a moment of insight reduces retention. What the brain does not act on, it quickly begins to forget. Similarly, in the spirit, what you do not move on, you become numb to. Repetition without action leads to desensitization. That's why someone can hear sermon after sermon, receive prophecy after prophecy, and still feel spiritually dry. The issue is not input, it is inactivity. Movement bridges the gap between what is heard and what is experienced. It completes the circuit. When God initiates a shift, the correct response is movement, even if it's a small step. That movement signals alignment. It tells your brain and your spirit that you are ready to flow with divine momentum. Many people are waiting for peace before they move, but often peace follows movement. The brain's fear center, the amygdala, quiets down once action begins. Action reduces uncertainty. Obedience calms the storm, but when you hesitate, fear gains strength. The voice of hesitation becomes louder than the voice of truth. What started as a whisper of doubt becomes a roar of paralysis. And the tragedy is that the longer you delay, the more comfortable you become with the delay. Delay becomes your new normal. You begin adjusting your expectations, lowering your faith, silencing your hunger. You settle into a version of life that is manageable but far beneath what was originally available. That's the consequence of hesitation. Not just missed moments, but diminished capacity to recognize future ones. God's shifts often come without full visibility. Faith is the bridge between insight and obedience. When God begins to move, he rarely reveals the entire picture in advance. Instead, he offers glimpses, nudges, and impressions that require a response before understanding fully unfolds. This process is not a flaw in communication, but an intentional design to build trust. Human nature craves clarity and certainty, but the way of faith operates through obedience in uncertainty. From a neurological standpoint, the brain prefers prediction and pattern recognition. It wants to anticipate outcomes before taking action. However, faith often disrupts that system by calling us to act before all variables are known. This is where the tension lies. between the need to see and the call to trust. Faith does not eliminate uncertainty, it reframes it. It says that what is unseen is not unknown to God and therefore can be walked into with confidence. The brain's frontal cortex, responsible for planning and decision making, naturally tries to assess risks and form strategies. But when God's instruction requires stepping outside of human logic, the decision to obey must override the need to analyze. This is not anti-intellectualism, it's spiritual prioritization. It's acknowledging that divine direction is often outside the realm of human foresight and demands a response that is based not on data but on trust. Biblically, this pattern is repeated constantly. Abraham was told to leave his country and go to a land God would show him. Not a full map, not a list of guarantees, just a direction and a promise. Moses had to return to Egypt with nothing but a staff and a word. Joshua had to walk around walls without swinging a weapon. Each of these stories shows the same pattern. God initiates a shift, provides limited information, and waits for obedience. It's in that space between insight and obedience that faith is proven, not just believed, but lived out. Because real faith is not what you say in comfort. It's what you do in uncertainty. The reason many people miss divine shifts is because they wait for complete visibility. They want full assurance, perfect timing, and logical steps. But God often speaks in seed form. He gives you enough light to take the next step, not the next 10. That next step, however small, is the trigger for revelation. As you move, more is revealed. As you act, clarity unfolds. It is a progressive unveiling, not a comprehensive download. The bridge between what God shows and what God fulfills is built one obedient step at a time, and that bridge is called faith. In neuroscience, this parallels the way new neural pathways are formed. The brain does not wait until a complete network is mapped out to begin adapting. It responds to repetition and movement. Each new thought or behavior strengthens the emerging pattern, building structure through motion. Spiritually, this mirrors how trust is formed. Each obedient step builds capacity for more direction. Each act of surrender trains the heart to follow more quickly the next time. But when we wait passively for full understanding, we short-circuit the process. We trade movement for overthinking, action for paralysis. Faith is also what transforms fear into expectation. The unknown will always stir some degree of discomfort, but faith doesn't remove the unknown. It empowers you to face it with anticipation instead of anxiety. This shift in perspective is crucial. The brain's default mode network tends to generate negative projections when facing uncertainty, but when the mind is renewed by the Word of God and the promises of His character, that default setting begins to change. Instead of expecting failure or confusion, you begin to expect fulfillment, not because of the path, but because of the one who laid it out. God's shift tests our willingness to move without control. Most people don't realize that control is often the enemy of obedience. We think we need to manage everything, plan every outcome, protect against every risk. But faith is the surrender of control in exchange for trust in divine guidance. It's not reckless, it's rooted in relationship. The more you know the character of God, the more you are willing to follow Him even when you can't predict the destination. And the more you follow, the more your spiritual instincts are sharpened. The goal is not to have a perfect understanding of what's next. The goal is to develop a responsive heart, a heart that hears God's voice and moves even if the map is missing, a heart that values presence over predictability, because the shift doesn't require you to know everything. It requires you to trust the one who does, and that trust is built through practice, through small yeses, through consistent movement in response to invisible cues. That's how you grow from fear to faith, from hesitancy to confidence, from waiting to walking. The shift is already in motion, but whether or not you walk in it depends on your willingness to cross the invisible bridge between what you know and what He's calling you to do. Your preparation determines your capacity to hold what God is about to release. Every significant shift that comes from God is preceded by a season of preparation. This preparation is not always visible or glamorous, but it is absolutely necessary. It's where foundations are laid, character is forged, discernment is sharpened, and endurance is built. Spiritually, God never entrusts greater responsibility or blessing to someone who lacks the structure to sustain it. Just like pouring new wine into old wineskins leads to waste, divine opportunities require renewed capacity. Preparation is not about earning God's favor, it's about stewarding His favor well when it arrives. The brain responds to preparation through repetition and intentional focus. Neural pathways become more efficient when actions are consistently practiced. This principle mirrors the spiritual truth that habits, disciplines, and rhythms train the soul to recognize, receive, and respond to God. When God begins to shift things in your life, it's often not a test of your desire, but a test of your readiness. You can want the next level, but not be able to hold it. You can dream about expansion, but collapse under its weight if you haven't developed the internal infrastructure to manage it. Preparation expands your capacity. It stretches your mind, matures your emotions, and strengthens your faith muscles. Many people want acceleration, but they resist the quiet work of preparation. They want breakthrough without building. They want platforms without process. But God does not rush maturity. He does not elevate someone to a place they are not prepared to carry. Preparation is where the unseen work happens. It's in the early mornings of prayer when no one is watching. It's in the consistent disciplines that feel monotonous. It's in the painful pruning of relationships, desires, and mindsets that no longer serve your future. Every step of obedience, every moment of patience, every act of discipline is preparing you to hold what's coming. In neuroscience, the brain's ability to perform complex tasks improves through focused rehearsal. Athletes, musicians, and surgeons all rely on repetition to ingrain skills so deeply that they become second nature. Spiritually, the same applies. When you cultivate faithfulness in the small things, you prepare your soul for the demands of greater things. If you can't steward today's responsibilities with integrity and joy, you won't be able to handle tomorrow's blessings without compromise. God doesn't just want to give you something. He wants to give it to someone who's ready. Someone who won't be destroyed by what was meant to be a blessing. Preparation also reveals your true motives. In seasons of waiting and hiddenness, your intentions are exposed. Are you preparing because you truly want to serve God's purpose, or are you preparing to be seen, applauded, validated? The refining fire of preparation burns away the impurities of ambition and ego. It humbles you. It teaches you to find joy in the process, not just the outcome, and that humility becomes the foundation upon which God can build, because God is not just after your productivity, He's after your heart. And your heart is most clearly revealed in the waiting. There's also a rhythm to divine preparation. Sometimes it feels like nothing is happening, but in reality, deep work is being done beneath the surface. Like a seed planted in the soil, there is growth that takes place in silence and darkness. Roots are stretching before fruit is visible. This invisible preparation is what ensures stability when the growth becomes public. If the roots are shallow, the tree won't last in the storm. Likewise, if your preparation is shallow, the shift you step into won't be sustainable. God prepares you in obscurity so you can stand in visibility. He stretches you in private so you don't break in public. Your preparation doesn't just affect you. It affects everyone connected to your calling. When you take the season of preparation seriously, you're not just building your own strength. You're creating a legacy. You're modeling discipline, trust, and surrender. You're influencing atmospheres and paving the way for others to walk in freedom. What you build in preparation becomes the platform for future impact. It is not wasted time. It is investment. Every prayer, every fast, every quiet decision to choose obedience over comfort adds weight to your spiritual foundation. The difference between those who endure and those who collapse under pressure is not talent, it's preparation. Talent may open the door, but preparation keeps you standing once you walk through it, and God, in His love and wisdom, often withholds what you're praying for until He knows you're ready, not because He's punishing you, but because He's protecting you. He's developing in you the capacity to carry the weight of your assignment, because what's coming is too heavy for shallow roots, too sacred for a careless heart, and too powerful for an unprepared vessel. Alignment with God's timing demands that you quiet external noise and listen to internal conviction. In a world saturated with constant stimulation, information, and distraction, tuning into divine timing requires intentional stillness. The human brain is designed to respond to stimuli it lights up in the presence of sound, movement, and change. While this responsiveness is beneficial for survival and learning, it can also become a barrier to spiritual sensitivity when the noise is constant and unfiltered. Every notification, opinion, and demand can become a competing voice against the still, quiet leading of God. The mind begins to associate movement with urgency, noise with relevance, and speed with success. But God's pace is different. His timing is precise, deliberate, and often slow by worldly standards. The brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and attention, struggles when overloaded. When you're surrounded by constant input, your ability to discern is impaired. You begin to make decisions based on pressure instead of peace, based on trends instead of truth. This is where the need to quiet external noise becomes crucial. Quietness is not just the absence of sound, it is the intentional tuning of your inner world to hear the frequency of God's voice, and His voice often whispers. It does not compete, it invites. To hear it, you must withdraw from the crowd, pause the scrolling, silence the opinions, and create space for internal clarity. Internal conviction is the compass God often uses to guide you when visibility is low. It is that deep, unshakable knowing that doesn't come from logic or emotion alone. It's what remains after the pros and cons have been weighed, after the advice has been gathered, after the emotions have settled. Conviction is born in intimacy with God. It is shaped in prayer, refined in waiting, and confirmed through peace. But it can only be accessed when the noise is reduced. Just like tuning a radio, the clearer the frequency, the clearer the message. And in seasons where God is shifting things, clear conviction becomes your lifeline. Many people miss divine timing not because they're disobedient, but because they're distracted. They're listening to so many voices that they can't discern which one is God's. Every new piece of advice, every new video, every new trend pulls their attention in a different direction. And attention is the currency of transformation. What you give your focus to shapes your thoughts, your emotions, and ultimately your actions. When your focus is fractured, your discernment is dulled. You might feel busy, even spiritual, but you are out of sync with the timing of heaven. Movement without alignment is motion without purpose. It creates exhaustion instead of progress. Listening to internal conviction requires trust. It demands that you stop asking everyone else what they think and start asking God what He's saying. It means being okay with silence, with slowness, with simplicity. It means learning to recognize the difference between a good idea and a God idea. The good idea may look perfect on paper, but if it doesn't come from alignment, it will lead to frustration. God's timing is rarely early, never late, and always right. But it often requires waiting past your comfort and moving past your logic. Conviction helps you stay anchored during that wait. It reminds you of what you heard, even when your circumstances seem to contradict it. From a neurological standpoint, the more you practice tuning into one voice, the voice of the Holy Spirit, the stronger that pathway becomes in your brain. This is how habits are formed and how discernment is sharpened. Just like the brain builds muscle memory through repetition, the Spirit builds recognition through obedience. Every time you quiet the noise and respond to conviction, you strengthen your sensitivity. Every time you ignore distractions and choose stillness, you increase your capacity to discern. Over time, this becomes your default posture, not reactionary, but responsive, not hurried, but holy. God often operates in rhythms, not random events. His timing flows like a current, and alignment requires you to be in sync. If you move too soon, you step ahead of grace. If you move too late, you miss divine momentum. But when you move in alignment, there is flow, peace, and supernatural ease. That alignment is not achieved through calculation, but through consecration. It is cultivated in the secret place, where your ears are trained and your heart is softened. In that place, God reveals not just what to do, but when to do it. Timing becomes as important as instruction, because in the kingdom of God, obedience is not just about action. It's about timing. To live in alignment with God's timing, you must become a person who values stillness as much as action. You must learn to be led by the inner witness, not just outer validation. You must build a lifestyle where your soul is quiet enough to detect the subtle shifts in God's leading. In a noisy world, this is not easy, but it is essential. Because when the shift comes, it won't be announced by fanfare or forced by pressure. It will be discerned by those who have trained themselves to listen, to wait, and to move with conviction rather than noise.